All right. Well, welcome to the This is America Shorts Q&A. My name is Josh Greenwood, and I am the programming director at the Lower East Side Film Festival. Today we have a lot of great filmmakers here to talk about their wonderful films. We have Chris Lowe from Black Ghost Sun. We have Ian Bell from 808, How We Respond. Deepak Sethi from Coffee Shop Names. Sofian Khan, Do We Belong? And also Noah Ashraf from Sofa So Good. So today we'll talk to each of the filmmakers about their films, and then we'll get into some more broader questions with the whole group. So first of all, I want to talk about Do We Belong? So Sofian, I have a couple questions. Personally, I love the film. And if you could just kind of give us a brief synopsis of your film, because not everyone has seen the film, and then we'll get into a couple questions.
Sure. So in 2017, shortly after the inauguration of President Trump, there was an incident in a place called Olathe, Kansas, where an Indian engineer who was working at Garmin after work with his friend was having a drink at a bar, and a man came in and said, "You get out of my country," and shot him and killed him. And so the film is about his widow a year later, kind of honoring his memory. And she had written a post, asking this question, do we belong, just very directly about, whether this country is a place where she wanted to make her life. And obviously her life had been shattered at that point. So it was a real act of faith to continue and stay on and, and feel the community come around her in a positive way. So the film just kind of documents that.
Yeah. And so if you work primarily in documentary, you said, and a question I had was, something that struck me about this film was that, it is a short and you really get to hone in on one person's perspective with something like this, with a hate crime. And so I was curious, if you have worked in a longer length format for a story like this, what that difference was, or like, what are the opportunities you might get in working with a short versus a longer sort of scale project?
Sure. I mean, when we did this film, we just finished a feature actually that was about Afghan and Iraqi interpreters who worked with the U.S. and were, struggling to get these visas to settle, get out of danger basically with their families. And that really thematically was pretty connected in the same sense of like arriving from, this country that you fought for and had to leave your own home because you were part of their mission. And a lot of the same questions were swirling around about belonging and feeling like there was a place for them to make their life here, especially with the sort of rhetoric that was just, which we're hearing right now as well and have been for the last, 4 years. In the long form, it really became, I think, a little bit more an opportunity to just be a fly on the wall and see those themes play out in really subtle ways, like something like, this Iraqi interpreter goes into a barber shop, and the conversation that comes out of that is they're little moments, and you're hitting those themes in really subtle ways. I think the difference with the short is that, we only shot for 3 days. It was very surgical in telling the story, and some of the things were, they weren't staged, because she was having this, year anniversary event for her husband, and all those things
Right.
were legit, but it was much more about, the interview. I mean, the interview really ran the story, and I think that's with a short where you don't have a lot of time to get those verite moments. That's going to inevitably be the case. So I think those are the two big differences that I found in working, those two very similar projects in a way.
Right. And like working in documentary versus a narrative, there is that sort of spontaneity that you have to work with in getting the story right. And so I didn't know that you shot it in like basically a long weekend worth of time. And so I'm sure there were moments where you had to be able to get as much information as you could, but then also, be able to get a nuance and not feel rushed. Were there any parts where you had to control the amount of time that you had and like really sort of surgically find what you need? Did you come in with an idea, or was it sort of on the go?
I mean, we definitely came in with an idea. There was a lot of prep work. So although we shot for 3 days, we had been talking for a while. I mean, I reached out to her not long after, it happened, and it just didn't make sense to start filming until, months later. Um, but I would say that the major difference, like the advantage of something like this, which is sort of very emotional by its nature, is that being there for something significant like that, tells the story. Whereas like sometimes with like branded content stuff, you're creating things and staging things. So I think it's just sometimes with like I would say the subject matter of it just lent itself to being a short and kind of intense 3 days of really reflecting on something that had happened over the past year, but everything else that had happened in their life as well. And it was just it just lent itself to being a very short shoot. I think we may have gained more from staying longer, but I would say we hit all the notes that we were trying to hit, to tell the story.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so layered, and I loved how personal it felt for being a short film. Like not you don't always get such a full picture of a situation in such a short amount of time. So I thought that was such a strong part of the film. So thank you for that. So we'll move on to 808, How We Respond. So this film is kind of wild. Ian, if you want to give us like just a brief idea, it's very like you kind of have to see it to understand it, but if you can kind of give us an idea.
Yeah, so some of us will remember that 3 years ago. See, I can't remember now. Our dear leader was in a verbal spat with the leader of North Korea, and they were calling each other fat. And they've obviously been testing nuclear missiles and expanding their range. And one morning, in the heat of all this, every resident of Hawaii and every person that was visiting, everyone on the islands received a text saying a missile was imminent, a missile attack was imminent. And so my wife's from Hawaii, and so we have a lot of family and friends there. And so we had heard a bunch of stories about people and deciding what to do with their last moments, because it was a credible, it was from the state government, a text saying you're all going to die. And so for me, being in New York at the time, I don't know, I think the mainland response was really hard to digest. It was very quickly a joke. And for me and for my family, it was, a few million folks that thought they were going to die that morning, and all because we're under such a unstable government. Yeah. And so, so I've been thinking a lot about how to use people's what's considered user-generated content, UGC. I've been thinking about how to do it because the stories I was interested in, I often couldn't be there on time, and I'm not a great grant writer, and it's always hard to like come out of pocket to get into the far reaches of the world, and
Sure, yeah.
And also, I think most of us are trying to tell other people's stories in an honest way. And so I just started scouring the internet for anything that people were posting of themselves in those moments. And what came out of it was, I don't know, it's like almost an 8-minute piece, 7.5 minutes of people showing us what they think are their last moments. And what I didn't realize was I would also find it really fascinating why people chose to put cameras on themselves and how people treat those last moments. And so anyway, it's folks who open the window.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the first thing that I thought was, how did you get this footage? But then as I kept watching, I was like, well, we live in an age where social media, like people are offering such an intimate look at themselves constantly. And maybe it's fabricated, maybe it's not fabricated, but I think you did such a great job of like finding enough of a spectrum of material to craft your narrative in a way that you could tell a story and get a lot of different perspectives, which I thought was so wild about it. But I think another thing that is like particularly interesting in terms of like a cultural look is how like vanity or just technology has informed our perspective on like what is going on in a given moment, particularly right now. Like I watched it again, and thinking about it in like a COVID world, I think it's really interesting how it talks about mortality and how we are insignificant, but we still have a lot of really significant things going on, and what people choose to talk about and what's really important at the very end, right? So yeah, I wonder like maybe what your editing process was, and like it is sort of like there's a lot of found footage in it. So I wondered, like where you sort of crafted those little bits to tell your story as a filmmaker.
Yeah, so before I was a filmmaker, I thought I was going to be an academic. I was a social scientist. And so as I started getting into UGC or archival footage, it started feeling like data points. Like when you're interviewing people or doing focus groups, you're collecting material, you're collecting thoughts, and you start categorizing those thoughts, and they start teaching you what the whole arc is for whatever the thing you're studying. And so I took 4 hours of footage, just watched it until I saw themes emerge. And it kind of just tells you how to cut itself. But of course, because film and you want people to be engaged, it wouldn't have worked if people didn't give you enough footage and didn't allow themselves to be characters. And I was really grateful to some of the people who let the camera run as long as they did, because there's people that are live streaming all the time. And so I had to find those folks first that were live streaming about nothingness, or just about whatever they talk about, and then have that alarm come in. And then you can kind of jump off because you can feel your average day being interrupted.
Yeah. And I can feel like the sociological lens involved, and like using data almost to inform what's important, what's not. But
And for me, last thing to say, because I know it's time short, but because Hawaii is it's a colonized part of all of our country is colonized, but it's freshly colonized, and there is a different culture and different attitude for those who are historically local, for the Native Hawaiians, and it's also a paradise for folks to go pretend to do relax. It's a great place to go relax. Yeah. And then there's the spectrum of folks that have been there for 10 days or 3 generations, but didn't originate there. And so as best I could, and having some small understanding of what that is, some very brief understanding of what that looks like from my time there, I tried to capture that as best as possible, but who's to say if I'm speaking for.
Yeah, no, I thought it was such a fun little glimpse at life, and I would be interested to see what something like that would look like in a longer form as well. But yeah, so thank you so much for that. We'll move on. What's up?
Oh, I'm working on a feature in the same format, so I'll let you know.
Okay. There you go. Please do. Cool. So we'll move on over to Sofa So Good. So if you can, let us know what it's all about.
Sofa So Good is a movie about a young woman searching for a sofa. That's basically it.
Love it.
Very simple. Yeah, it's a comedy.
No,
and
I love it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I loved how simple it was, and I guess my first question was, were you also in that position of trying to find a sofa yourself?
Yes.
What inspired the story?
The story was inspired actually, by me moving to a new apartment in New York and taking a very long time to find the perfect sofa, only to realize that it means something completely different. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it was kind of like finding a sense of home, I guess. And it also, so I also do comedy, and I'm like very much into comedy. And I'm Israeli, and it's always like a bit tricky to write in a different language. But now, I mean, I obviously got better in it. And I thought of a pun, so far so good. And every time I make a pun, I'm really proud of myself. So I was like, okay, if I found such a perfect pun, and I also like really need to find a sofa, I need to make a movie out of it. That was the concept, basically.
It was great, yeah.
Yeah.
And well, and so kind of hearing about your background, and I thought like your metaphor was really like present in the film, and yeah, like that idea of making home, particularly with the mother daughter relationship. I wondered, like how much of that did you want initially to be part of the story, or was it something that you were able to kind of that came out of maybe your shoot
Uh,
and like maybe the takes that you got from the actors?
um, yeah, it's interesting. I didn't when I wrote the script. There's like a scene at the end with the mother that kind of close everything together, and I didn't think it will have so much weight. But then in the editing, it kind of became more because it was such a comedy, and like the scene with the mom is a little bit more dramatic.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't really plan to have so much weight in it. Like also most of the actors in the movies are comedians from the comedy scene in New York, stand-up comedians, and the mom is somewhat more of an very established actress actually, Yama Abbas.
Yeah.
So I didn't plan for it to have like such a weight, but then this scene was so good, and I also got so much from Hiyam as an actress, to the text and to the scene, and she had such a good chemistry with Natalie Okar, my main role. So it kind of became more about that at the end.
That's It was great. Well, it was so fun to watch, and
Yeah.
you all should pop on in and give it a look if you can. So we'll keep going. Next we got up is up names. So Deepak, it was great. Let us know what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, it was about the names that you use at Starbucks when they can't pronounce your real name. So I used Derek, and one day they spelt it Derek with 2 R's, and for some reason it just annoyed me inside. But then I realized, like, why am I annoyed about a name that is not even mine? It's just a fake name I use, and it struck me that I had like this persona attached to my Starbucks name, and I thought it was funny that you choose that name, and there's a point where you have to decide, okay, what name am I going to use in America to I'm not American, but when I'm here, what is it that I use, and why did I choose it? And that sort of led to 3 Indians who are waiting for their coffee, and they talk about why they've chosen the names they've chosen.
Yeah, I thought it was such a great film because I think it is a really good way of understanding an identity if you exist as a person of color in this country, that has a heritage that's almost, it's like much larger than this country, but you're still, at least what I got out of it was that it feels like that tightrope of trying to figure out that identity in this country. I thought it was handled, in such a fun way, particularly like in their own interpretations of like who their American identity was, and maybe who and like what their Indian name actually means.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's funny because my name has this like historical Sanskrit meaning that is like kind of very nice, and yet I choose to use Derek because it's so much easier. And so I think I wanted to sort of express that, yeah, our names are nice, but at the same time, we don't want to have that moment of mispronunciation. It's just that little tiny second of discomfort that we're trying to avoid at the cost of using our real names. And I don't think there was any sort of meaning that I was trying to preach behind it, except for names are kind of funny, and why do we do this thing that we do?
right. And I think that idea, or at least that like kind of coming to an understanding, is something that is in a lot of you know, cultural groups of color, you know, like in a Black community, I think there's a similar tendency of having like this name where like it almost helps you, or like has an appearance of being a like higher class, because there's a lot of ideas of social mobility, and so then you have this expectation from your family, maybe in one sense, with what that name is meant to carry. But then, you know, in the context of like a Starbucks or a coffee shop, I think there's this weird thing where it's like you just want to exist without all of the like mental math that's associated with it, but then you also do want to hold some pride to like where you come from. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally feel that. And what's great about doing this was that it wasn't just Indian people relating to it. It was like, hey, everyone, there was, you know, even non-POC use coffee shop names.
My Starbucks name is Nora.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so that's great. And
Yeah.
that made me feel good, because it was about aliases. You know, it was about the names that we use, not just at coffee shops, but what do we use online? You know, we all have a little movement of like, here's my persona online. Everyone gets to choose a different identity in a little way. And so that's why I was hoping to hit that area.
Yeah, and I think that the like dichotomy or the struggle of identity is something that's really going on right now, and I think it was refreshing though to see it played out in a magical sort of realistic perspective, and like I love comedy too, and I think when it's doing its job best, it's informing, but also like broadening what we consider in just a general framework of a discussion, right? And so I thought you did a really fun job of like, when they do imagine what, you know, their American names might mean, like, you know, the firefighter or like the woman, the bookstore. That, I think that was such a fun way of extending our perspective beyond just like a very like, you know, boring conversation, you know, on the news or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that. We'll go last but not least to Black Ghost Sun. So Chris, great film. Just tell us a little bit about it.
Black Ghost Sun is about a Chinese American man raising a black son as a single father, and the short really focuses on a moment where they both are starting to come to terms with the difference in their race.
Great, yeah, and I watched this film again recently, and when I had seen it the first time, you know, I really gravitated to how well the tone was constructed throughout the piece, and then when I watched it again, just in light of the world and my own dealing with the world, I thought what was really intriguing about it was how you talked about racial identity, but from sort of two different perspectives who are both like people of color, and like almost like I wrote down in my notes it's like sort of the racial proximity, right? Like what identities mean in relationship to each other, particularly when it relates to, you know, being a father, what that could mean, and the advice and just like the things that he's trying to help his with, but how that is that can be a confusing conversation, especially to kids. And I wonder, sort of in this story and the writing of it, or you know, in interaction with your actors, like how you navigated, especially with like a kid, like how you could get some of those moments, because I think like you had some really great moments where you captured subtlety, but it wasn't like over the head, right? It wasn't like I'm trying to, you know, like really hammer in this, you know, point. It was like, let us just kind of them. So
I think maybe the most challenging aspect of the film for me was that all the actors, the person who plays the father, Gary Look, he's not a professional actor, And for Kayvon, who played his son, that was one of his first acting experiences. So they're both in very different spaces in terms of their experience and how they're approaching it. And I kind of just had to cajole the performances from either of them. And sometimes, you know, especially with Kayvon being so young, maybe he didn't see the point or the goal, the aim in a specific scene. And I would just have to dial him into to a certain zone, and he was awesome. He was amazing. And he just sort of give it to you. Whether he got it or not, he was like, okay, I'm going to listen to you. I think you're crazy. I don't know why you're asking me to do these things, but I'm going to go with it. And with Gary, I think it was really about stripping away everything that he wanted to bring in, and just trying to
like keeping it simple.
Keeping it simple and having internalize as much as he could. And somehow between that and then the editing and utilizing the environments to speak for them, I think is what enabled me to communicate what I was aiming for in the short to some degree.
Yeah, for sure. And the video game moment, did you use that as a way of was your direction sort of like play some video games and then we're going to capture kind of what comes out of that? Because I thought that was such a great idea, and I was just wondering if that was like how you kind of structured that scene.
That was pretty free flowing, and just from knowing Kayvon and Gary, I figured it would be, you know, we could just let him run and bond and try to capture that as a moment between two people, a father and son, you know, connecting. Because Kayvon is naturally really funny. And you know, he's so cute. So
yeah, no, I think it worked really well, and that makes sense. Them maybe not being like traditional actors in any sense. I think you almost were able to get more out of them because they came with less of like a prepared thought of like what they'd like to perform in a given moment. So I thought that was super well done. Well, yeah, so that is all of the films. So we'll open this next question or two up to everybody. What I want to ask everybody is what they're watching right now. I know it's kind of crazy times right now, and so I love just hearing what people are just consuming. It could be the dumbest movie you've ever seen. It could be the most highbrow TV series or film that you've ever seen. But you know, whatever you're watching, I want to know about it. So for me personally, right now, I'm watching two shows. I'm watching The Great, and I'm also watching Homecoming. I'm a sucker for a costume drama, and I also love Homecoming because it's so great, and I'm really excited that like noir structure is kind of coming back into popularity because it's wonderfully done. But yeah, jump in there. What are people watching?
I'll just say I also watched The Great, and I think it's fantastic. But last night I turned on The Disaster Artist, which I haven't weirdly I missed. But living in LA, just the idea of that movie, and especially for all the filmmakers here, just the idea of Tommy and his sort of approach to filmmaking must be so opposite.
It's hard to watch because I feel so bad almost when I watch it. Yeah, it's a rough one, but a must watch, I think, if you are a filmmaker, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think anyone can relate to the way he makes a film, but I mean, maybe. I mean, there's the passion, but like, wow, just on the execution and the fact that they sort of spoofed the behind the scenes of another film and also captured the sort of cult following was pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else? No, what are you watching?
I'm working on some stuff, so I'm watching a lot of social media again. So at night, I have to not watch anything that takes any effort, and so I'm watching. I never watched season 3 of RuPaul's Drag Race, and so like watching Shangela and Manila's origin story, which is very fun. For those of you who are
Very
fans.
good.
That's all I
Deep
got.
cuts, deep cuts.
I'm watching Rami right now, the second season. I mean, I started watching Hyam, who plays in my film, plays in Rami. So I wanted to watch her and other people as well. It's really great. I really love it. And I'm trying to watch, I was like, I made a list of films I want to watch during Corona times. I'm sure you all tried as well. But then I keep finding myself watching the news again and again. And it's like, instead of watching all the classics I want to watch. So, yeah. But last night I watched the movie on Hulu, Shirley, and that's actually a good movie by Josephine Becker. So
Okay.
I recommend
Cool.
that. Yeah, with Elizabeth Moss.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sophia, what are you watching?
I'm rewatching The Wire because my girlfriend hasn't seen it. It's been a while.
Good for you.
And but I need to jump on Rami for sure. That's my next.
How is The Wire second watch?
You know, it was funny because I was so like I could see my girlfriend was having trouble getting into it. Like it's a very slow start in the first season, but there's like this moment where it just clicks, and you can tell she's just like, "What are we watching? What are we watching?" So you know that I was like slightly defensive about how she was responding at first, and being like, "No." But yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. The writing is just so solid, and it's like funny in places too. You know.
Yeah, I think the thing about The Wire, which is wild, is like it's so relevant in a way that like it's gonna keep being relevant regardless of maybe the news that's attached to it because of maybe how spot on the writing is. And I think that's why I loved it when I saw it, because I also missed the boat like when it first came out. And then I watched it I think like a year ago, and when I saw it, I was like, this is still so wonderfully relevant. But I could tell it was like dated for when it was made, you know. So that I'm always in awe about how they made that show, how they wrote that show. Deepak, you have something to say?
Oh no, I totally agree, and I just watched The Wire from the beginning as well, and I feel that on that first season. But there's a moment, and you also have to remember, like they're British. A lot of them are British actors with British accents, and they
So
they
good.
Right.
Baltimore
About that.
accents so perfectly well done. It's fantastic.
And it is a comedy. I didn't think about it, but you're right. There's a lot of funny things about it. A lot of humor in it.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, what are you watching?
I think I've been neglecting my viewing schedule. I've been doing a lot of reading, but I guess one of the recent films I watched, and it's not a recent film, but it's one of Werner Herzog's earliest films, Even Dwarfs Start Small, which if you're into that kind of stuff, it's an interesting viewing. That's all I'll say about that. It's not easy watching, but yeah, otherwise, not too much. More reading, and yeah, I really don't know how I spend my time. Honestly, the days just pass by somehow.
They do, right? And in the like pandemic, cultural revolution, there's a lot to consume just outside of maybe a fictional or a documentary space. So it's always good to get some like recs, but also kind of get an idea of what people are in. But yeah, and you know, I guess the last thing I want to just ask folks is kind of like in this time, we're in a very interesting time. I think a very exciting time to tell stories. And you know, what do you think? You know, what place can we hold in a filmmaker space to sort of either make things better, shine a light on something? You know, what do we hope to try to say that can sort of inform, or you know, or how people reflect on what's going on right now? It's a deep question.
I think you know. I think at any point, at any time, it's important for artists or filmmakers to shine a light where they don't think there is one, and to highlight stories of people that are underserved or ignored or alienated, or just to make things to entertain people, especially now. I saw there was a post recently about, there was a survey about the top 5 non-essential jobs during the pandemic. The number one out of those, 71% of respondents said an artist, which is ludicrous because what are we reading? What are we watching? What are we listening to? They've never been more important, I think.
And I think people look to a perspective that is, I think right now too, a lot of artists, because we have some connection and just more information to consume that informs the art we make. I think there is a want to sort of make sense or make light of what's going on through a filter, from an artistic filter, in conjunction maybe with the news just generally consuming. And I think that's where that importance sort of collides.
For me, what's interesting in this time is that more Corona time, let's say, is that I think because we couldn't really go out and create films, it really forced people to think about how to, create in the means that they have. And maybe we kind of learn from that you don't have to have all the big production means to produce something meaningful. And I hope that's something that with people, like that as artists, maybe we can take that with us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm excited to see that too, because I think, like there's almost a different understanding or a comprehension of what filmmaking can be or what storytelling can be. I think people still want a good story, a quality story. But I think that I am excited to see what comes out of this in terms of the voices that get heard, but also, the amount and how the access might change to make some of those stories, right?
Yeah. Also, I'm just curious about comedy. Like, just coming from, I'm a stand-up as well. I can't do any stand-up for maybe 2 years or so. And I'm just curious how that funnels into other means. Like comedians have to go somewhere else to do what they do. And where do they go? Are we telling stories through film? Are we telling stories through podcast? We're going to go somewhere. There's no way a comic, I know all of they have to say something about this. And I'm curious as to where comedy goes. I think it's needed more now than ever. And I wonder how it transforms.
Yeah, you already see that on social media and stuff, I think. And I feel for you because I know you're probably dying to go on stage and
to nobody,
Yes. And Zoom shows are not exactly proving themselves. So
right.
I tried a few. So.
You got to hit the virtual open mic. If that, I guess that's becoming a thing.
Like an open mic is not bad enough.
Yeah, I was wondering what's worse than an open mic, and now I know. It's
a virtual open mic, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that comedy, because I've been talking to a few other friends about what's going to come out of the pandemic side of this era, and I'm not sure I want to see anything. Like, I don't know what the thing is. I don't know if I want to watch a movie in a year that's like, remember that time? But I think that comedy is where we're going to process the isolation, the pandemic, the mass death. As for the civil unrest and the civil rights, what we're seeing is the largest civil rights movement in our history. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that all of us are bound to respond to it and make something. What that is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think this is the beginning of that, and I think everyone's films were so fun for this program because there's so many different perspectives involved, and just personally, I'm glad that we could include everybody today. It was such a rad time, such a great group. So that will end the This Is America Q&A with all of our wonderful, wonderful filmmakers. Thank you, everybody, so much. We'll catch you
Thank you.
next time.